City of Stevens Point Bicycle and Pedestrian Street Safety Commission meeting, recorded August 22, 2023.
I'll call this meeting of the Stevens Point Bicycle and Pedestrian Street Safety Commission to order. Roll call.
O'Mara?
Here.
Finn?
Here.
Plassance?
Here.
Cole is excused. Peterson?
Here.
And Fisher.
Here.
We have a quorum.
The next item is the minutes of the July 11th, 2023 meeting. Any comments, deletions, or corrections? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to accept them as published.
I'll make the motion.
He made the motion. I was pointing to him, you didn't see him.
Second?
Sure.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now, a discussion of the walking and rolling audit.
Yes. So from 2:30 to about, I'd say maybe 4:15-ish, the commission did conduct a walk audit for some of the street segments planned for reconstruction in 2024. This would be the segment of Maria Drive from Division Street to the east and 2nd Street to the west, and then the stretch of Walker from 2nd Street north, or 2nd Street to the east and Forest Street to the west. So the point of the purpose of this conversation is, we talked a lot during the walk audit in part about kind of future planning, talking about the future park at the intersection of Maria and Prentice, talking about the convent redevelopment, talking about safe road to school planning as it relates to Pacelli and to a lesser extent, not part of the street project for 2024, but of Madison Elementary School. So again, the conversation that we had earlier this afternoon was more so future planning. What is going to be the design or the potential design of Maria and Walker once a project is completed? The purpose of this conversation for this meeting is going to be focusing more on the walk guide that you have in your packet from ARP. And what I figure on doing is talking more generally within each of the topics that's highlighted within the toolkit. So sidewalks, streets and crossings, street safety, public transit access, driver behavior, and then finalizing it with just overall comments and thoughts. So we'll start with, go back to the first page here. We'll start with sidewalks. Bless you. Any initial conversations or any initial thoughts that you have regarding sidewalks for the stretch of Maria and Walker? What are some observations that you've had that stuck out? Good or bad?
Which ones?
We're going to be just for sidewalks that we're going to be focusing.
For just on Maria?
We can do both Maria and Walker. We can couple it all. And
the ones on Walker were very old. There was vegetation covering them in some areas, and they weren't as wide as they're supposed to be because of the vegetation.
Yeah, there was that one house especially where, I think the standard width was about 5 feet for the width of the sidewalk, but for that one area particularly, you had kind of the hedge line extend to the sidewalk a good 2-3 feet, where in the case of using the wheelchair that you provided, it'd be very difficult to cross through it, either going over on the grass or going through the hedge line in order to go through. Any other comments?
We were missing a lot of sidewalk. I think that the area that was most critical was between Maria Drive, between Division and Union, and it will become all the way between Division and North 2nd. That area has a lot of traffic generators from Madison School to the Maria Drive Apartments to Pacelli, and they're all going to be pedestrian users.
Festival Foods is right there.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking of it more like where the generators are, but yeah, it's an area where people really want to walk and need to walk. And so those would be the areas where I think it's critical that we provide good pedestrian access. And that means putting in sidewalks. There was a proposal to put in a mixed-use path on the Maria Drive, old Maria Convent place, and I think that that's a good idea. I think that we really have to make sure that when we're done building the street, that people are able to walk that whole area with relative safety and comfort.
It's along that north side, especially, the north
Well,
side.
the north side is the one that has the most, but both sides.
Sidewalk.
Both sides need sidewalk. There is enough traffic generation there that both sides could use it, and if you don't provide it on both sides, you'll have a lot of jaywalking. On an arterial street is Maria that we really don't want to be crossing mid-block.
Any other comments?
With all the construction of housing and the population growth that's going to go on that north side too, it's definitely something. I was driving by there, it's like, okay, you've got the fence, you've got a line of trees, where's the sidewalk going to go on that side? Did they mention anything like that?
Yes.
Where is it going to?
We can get it in. On the north side, there is talk about having a path outside the right-of-way that'll be parallel to the street, which would take care of a lot of it. But there is space to put in through traffic, bicycle accommodation, and sidewalk with a decent green space.
Okay.
The pavement may shift left or right to where it is now, but there's no requirement that it be straight up the center. The idea is that it's in the right-of-way.
I think one of the topics that we brought up during the audit is the planned city park at the northwest corner of Maria and Prentice. Yes, not all of the planned improvements for the park are finalized at this time. There's still, future work to be done with our Parks, Rec, and Forestry Department for planning the future of this future park. But, that's just an added consideration, as you mentioned, Alder Plaisance, is that you're going to have expected additional pedestrians and bicyclists as part of the convent redevelopment project, but also having a public park there that's naturally going to incur a lot of foot traffic, especially for anybody who lives in the convent complex or even on kind of the north side of town here along Union, along Meadow. Naturally, if that's the closest park, that's going to be a favorable destination for folks.
I think the other thing, because there is some senior housing proposed for the Maria development, a lot of those people do not own cars, and when they walk, they're going to have to be, the sidewalk's going to have to be good enough that they can use wheelchairs or walkers, or even if they're just walking, they don't want to trip. And so it's going to require a high-quality solution.
Sure.
One of the things that kind of struck me for this walk audit, especially compared to previous years, is one of the common themes I've come across with focusing on sidewalks is you had a utilities pole smack dab in the middle of the line of traffic on the sidewalk. I don't recall ever experiencing or noticing that at all along either Maria or Walker, where you had a 5-foot wide sidewalk, but you had a utility pole right smack dab in the middle that if you're somebody in a wheelchair, for example, it'd be virtually impossible to utilize that segment of sidewalk.
I thought about that too, and I was looking at the sidewalk where you'd want to put it, where we have, and there are some places where we'd have to have the utilities move their poles.
For sure.
And it's important, you know, the utility will say it costs a lot of money, but they occupy our right-of-way at our pleasure. And we have to remember that.
Any other comments focusing just on sidewalks?
Sure. Near Madison Elementary, I noticed when just driving there, there's a lack of sidewalks and old sidewalks with a lot of grass growing in the cracks. And earlier this year, we completed a Habitat house, and I was working on it for Habitat for Humanity, and it was on Maria and past Walker.
Yeah, Georgia.
And yes, and what happened with that is that every Friday morning, we're going there, and all these kids are walking to school, and from that direction, everybody's walking in the street.
Yeah.
There's no sidewalks at all or anything. This is out of that area, but by a block. But just looking, and then you get right on 2nd Street, the first house on Walker, there's no sidewalk, and then the sidewalk starts after that.
Yeah, and that was a good conversation we had about, well, between Madison and Pacelli, our Safe Route to School plan. You know, our Safe Route to School plan is 10, 15 years old now. It's new, but relatively old, so to speak, but it's a comprehensive document that goes through really all proposed policy recommendations for all the schools within the county. And that's something that, you know, yes, as you mentioned, that this chunk of Maria is not part of the street reconstruction project for next year, but should this chunk of Maria be reconstructed at some point in the future, yeah, I'm sure there's going to be, you know, this segment, this chunk of sidewalk right here, just west of the school, was a good example where sidewalk A dead-ended, and B, it was virtually you couldn't pass through it because you had a bunch of trees and vegetation blocking it. That, you know, that would be something I'm sure that would be looked at. And obviously the repair, there were some segments that both Director Berdun and I kind of caught an eye on, especially in here where the chunk of sidewalk was pretty deteriorated. So I'm sure that'll be something that you'll look at when the time comes.
Yeah, I just want to second that there was a lot of lack of sidewalk, and then where there was sidewalk, it was like, okay, it's on this side, and now it's on this side. So if you're walking completely through the street or down this road, you would be swapping sides as you walk to stay on a sidewalk.
Perfect. Then we'll jump over to streets and crossings. This would be on page 25 of 30 of the agenda packet. So this is kind of two separate topics that are coupled all into one. So there were a couple times where we crossed there were several times that we crossed the street when walking along Maria and Walker. I guess general observation, were there any intersections that you as a pedestrian felt uncomfortable, just given a couple of factors that I'm sure we'll talk about later on, visibility, speeding, driver behavior?
As we did the walk audit, we stopped at Prentice and Maria Drive, the one that's by Pacelli, and also by the reconstruction of the convent area, and talked a lot about how that needs to be redeveloped, and the sight lines aren't very good, and what we'd need to do. And Public Works Director Berdun mentioned what they were planning on doing in order to open things up and make things more visible, no matter which corner of the intersection you were coming through.
Thankfully, we were going through that intersection at the time that Pacelli was getting.
It was really
closing.
busy
So,
when we were there, and there were
Yeah.
trucks going by and delivering beer, and lots of cars, and also, and students that were leaving, crossing that intersection.
One of the big issues we're going to have is Division Street is going to be rebuilt. It isn't part of this project, but we're going to intersect with it. And it's important that we do enough preliminary design that whatever we put in, it fits in, and we're not installing something and tearing it out 5 years later. The other thing to keep in mind with this stuff is, once we rebuild these streets, we're going to be stuck with them for 50 years. They're not going to change.
How did you all feel about signage? I know we talked, I think it was when we were walking towards Union, the intersection of Union and Maria, about, what situations come into play where there's a stop ahead sign that's posted well in advance of the actual stop sign. But outside of that, did you feel that there was appropriate signage along Maria and Walker? Were there enough stop signs where there should be? Were there issues, say, crossing an intersection that you felt that there should be better signage that alerts drivers that, hey, this is a high-trafficked pedestrian crossing? I guess, what's your general thoughts as it relates to the existing signage? You think it was adequate, or?
I think it was fine for the time of day that we were there. I'm not out, I don't know that area enough. There are probably busy times. I can imagine, I've been to Pacelli, and that road is nonstop. Maria is nonstop, because once Batch gets out, they all go up there. And but today, at the time that we were there, it wasn't really that crazy. I can imagine it gets crazy, but it didn't seem like it today.
I didn't think signing is the answer here. If it's getting crazy, most everyone's there makes it crazy the same way every day. So they don't need signs. And if you put too many signs in, then none of them are effective. And so I'm sort of a believer less is more with signs. Put the ones that are really needed, and I think the ones that are really needed are there. But I think the signage was in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I think the signage was fine too. The only thing I would say is even when I left, I drove down it too. It was some of the corners, the lack of visibility to see the cars until they're right there at the intersection. It's kind of freaky.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's school crossing or pedestrian signs that are on either side of Pacelli on Maria Drive. I didn't notice those, but
There is.
assuming there probably is. And Maria Drive and Walker Street are just both so different too.
Oh, for sure.
As far as how busy they are and what kind of signage.
Well, in
Thankfully,
fact, it's
son.
nifty.
Yeah, I guess while I'm just kind of skimming through
I just noticed that there were bike signs, and I was like, oh, that's good. Share the road.
There's a crossing right, I was going to say, right at Prentice and
Oh,
Maria,
okay.
there's the pedestrian crossing.
Sure.
On that side, and
Probably
on both
one
sides.
coming from, so it's at that crosswalk, that's right. Okay,
Yep.
one right there, yeah.
I think the visibility, as I mentioned during the audit, typically, and it's not surprising that, at least in my opinion, or my observation, visibility along Walker was worse when going through intersections when compared to Maria, just given older roadway, older part of town, so to speak, in terms of the built environment. Houses are generally a lot closer to the road. Landscaping, so Any other comments regarding street infrastructure or as a pedestrian crossing the street? We never have had a situation where there was a controlled intersection where we had to worry about like a push to walk buttons. But any other last minute comments regarding that?
I think we're going to have to use some ingenuity to try to improve Maria and Second Street. That's a area that there's nothing obvious that's bad about it, but it is because people come in so hot coming from the north. There's a lot of speeding there, and so we're going to have to figure out ways to discourage that sort of behavior. Some sort of traffic calming or perhaps some sort of channelization.
That's like an intersection for like 3 schools right there.
Yes.
For people going to Spash, Pacelli, and Madison, so that's a lot of kids.
Yeah. Okay. So the next we'll jump to street safety and appeal. This would be page 26, and we'll start with we'll start with appeal first. I guess just general observation along Maria and Walker, and this is maybe where it kind of gets a little difficult with Walker Street being a residential street, Maria Drive kind of being that primarily commercial, but then you have scatterings of residential, especially once you get west of Union Street. But I guess general appeal of the streets. I mean, did you feel as a pedestrian that did you generally feel safe? Did you generally feel comfortable? Would you want to walk these corridors again in the future without hesitation?
No.
Well, I think Maria Drive is, yeah, it's not inviting. It's not like unappealing.
Yeah.
The homes along there are nice, and the Comet is going to get fixed up. But when you look at what creates appeal, and there's some shade, some shade trees where we stop and talk when we did our the audit. But as far as city things like benches along the way or something like that, but I don't know if that kind of street lends itself to that. How there's not a lot of space, and so I don't really know. It seems like it's in such bad need of other reconstruction that getting to this, it is almost another step.
See, Janet, I thought that between the Maria project and Division Street, it wouldn't hurt for us to have a shaded bench because of the population we're serving. So that if it's a day like today and you're walking to get groceries and you're older than I am by a little bit, you might want to sit down. You might need to sit down. And I think that if we can fit one of those in someplace, because I was waiting to meet with you guys at the corner of Division and Maria, and there was absolutely no place to sit down unless I went into one of the businesses.
Yeah, so if room could be made on the terrace to put some benches would be great.
And it doesn't have to be much. In fact, the simpler it is, probably the better off it is, and sturdier it is.
I think once you get outside of Maria and Division,
Yes.
generally the options are more limited in terms of increasing the appeal for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for motorists, for that matter, along Maria and especially Walker. I mean, you see some of the suggestions that's listed on page 26. I mean, drinking fountains, public restrooms, trash receptacles. Does it make total sense in more of a downtown, more of a commercial corridor, say like a Division Street? Absolutely. Those options probably are going to be less farther down on the totem pole in terms of importance, that you're kind of limited in terms of improvements to landscaping, trees, the places to sit, if it's benches or any, like a small community gathering area, signage. Lighting was something I was going to ask you all. I mean, obviously we walk through Maria and Walker during the daylight hours, so you don't have a good observation of it, but would you, as a pedestrian, feel safe? Would you be comfortable walking along Maria and Walker during nighttime hours? I mean, I'm gonna disregard once you get by like Quick Trip, Dozerac, Division Street, because obviously there's lighting. But once you get farther west, say along Union Street towards 2nd Street.
I think the secret is when they design the lighting, that it's designed that it isn't spots at each intersection, that we have continuous lighting. It can be at a relatively low level. But I'll give you an example. Main and Clark Street have the lowest level design for lighting after you get to the east of Division Street, and no one ever notices it and thinks it's dark. And I think if you're going to rebuild the street, you might as well put in a decent lighting system. And the idea is to design it as a whole so that the lighting is uniform without having dark spaces.
I think it's important if you really expect with those apartments a lot more pedestrian traffic to have the better lighting too.
Right, we can assume that it is only going to get busier along there, so, and it is, a busy artery anyway.
See, I don't know if the traffic will go that much bigger just because of the generation of the number of units they're getting, although it seems like a large number, is not as much as the through traffic. But I think that
People walking.
that
or
it's
biking
the
through at night.
pedestrian
Right,
stuff is going to
right.
get heavier.
Yeah.
I think it could use some more shade trees. Some of it was fine, and then some portions there wasn't any, and then they were kind of saying about moving curbs and having more space, and then if you have more space, why not put in more trees? And then for the public restrooms that you just brought up, I was wondering if that was going to be something with the park, or if that's not that kind of park.
I mean, I know that's been talked about as far as comp plan efforts. We're going through our comp plan efforts for more of the northeast side of town around Gerke Park, Washington Elementary School, where there was interest amongst the neighborhood to add a public restroom within Atwell Park. I guess ultimately that'd be a conversation down the road, especially with with Director Kramer and his staff, as to is it feasible with the infrastructure already in place to add a public restroom, and then ultimately is there going to be the anticipated demand to make it cost effective? By all means, I mean, I've definitely heard a lot of comments through these neighborhood meetings about why there is a desire to have a restroom within a park, and honestly, it's opened my eyes along the way about
My kids gotta
why
go.
you-
Kids gotta go. As a mom.
There's no better way to put it than that. Then let's shift over to street safety. And this will still be page 26. I guess the one thing I want to talk about here is talking about the different road users, bicyclists, pedestrians, say people on a wheelchair. Is there a certain road user that you feel would feel less safe going along transporting along Maria Drive or along Walker Street? Is it generally, do you think it's kind of all one and the same, equal level of safety for a pedestrian, a bicyclist, somebody in a wheelchair, or do you think that there is a disparity with any one of those
I think
road users?
I think that the design of the parking lots specifically on Maria near Division Street, where you're in those big parking areas, there's really not a good delineation to tell either that there's a sidewalk at the exit of this parking lot, or that there's or to even inform the pedestrian the same. And right now, the sidewalks are such that people feel that they have to cut across the parking lot, which is terrible. And I think that that's something to work on. And I also think that specifically with Quick Trip, be nice to work with them, that there would be a intuitively safe way to get to their convenience store. Because right now you're walking across a free-for-all with the guys getting in and out of the gas pumps and going to that front and getting to the parking adjacent to the store. And I think there are things we can do, but it would have to be in the cooperation with them.
Yeah, I think you bring a really good point in that, say if you're somebody who lives, computer's being a little bit glitchy today. Say if you're somebody who lives farther west, farther
Yes.
southwest, you're coming from this direction to Quick Trip. The road of travel you're supposed to go, based off of the infrastructure in place, is south side of Maria, cross the intersection, walk along Division Street, pull up over here, and then come in. I mean, the infrastructure may already be in place, but let's be realistic here. I think if you'd poll people, if they're coming from this direction, walking over to Quick Trip, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna be crossing either Maria, that like we saw earlier today, crossing through the parking lot around here, or trying to find alternative means, say just crossing, kind of just walking the grassy strip here and over into the parking lot.
And you have cars not only coming in and out of each of those parking lots, which are right across from each other, but also coming off of Division Street, and also coming around even the corner from Prentice or North Prentice too. So it's whether you're on bike or a pedestrian or other wheels.
Yeah.
It's a crazy area.
This issue may be an issue for our zoning, that we set for in the future when they're designing these areas, that they provide pedestrian circulation as well as vehicle circulation.
Yeah, and that's,
Because now the cattle's already out of the barn, as we say. But maybe there are things we could do to have a place you could walk on the west side of that property and go across. It wouldn't be ideal, but it would be better than nothing, because right now it's a straight line for the entrance, and you better hope that all of the motor vehicles have their faculties about them.
and I'll echo the comment you made earlier, Mike, in that in the context of a parking lot here, once somebody, say, resurfaces their parking lot, it's good for a good chunk of time, an extended period of time, that, ultimately whatever project is done, whatever type of design is done, say in 2023, you're stuck with it for
At least 50 years.
well, lesser for a parking lot.
No,
But
parking lots are a lot less.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, ultimately that's something. There's a couple of avenues to help address kind of situations like this. Zoning reform is for
Yes.
sure one of them. Honestly, maybe another thing is kind of having these conversations through street reconstruction projects as they come about in each year thereafter. Are there specific properties where there's an issue or there's a perceived issue with pedestrian crossings to that establishment?
And if the guy across the street has an easier and safer way to get there, he's going to lose business if he doesn't provide for that sort of access. Now, right now, for selling beer, he's the only guy there. But it's not, occupancy change.
Any other comments regarding street safety?
I wouldn't feel safe if I was at night, like on Walker. I mean, even during the day, it's like there's not sidewalks on both sides, for one thing, and that just creates a whole, like, if you're using a walker like I was, and you come to a corner and there's nowhere to go with sidewalk, what do? You have to cross the street and then go to another sidewalk. It's like, well, why? Crossing that street is a safety issue.
Good example.
Especially in the dark.
Yeah, a good example is right here between Frederick and West, where north side, you have sidewalk all the way across, which is great. South side, you have it from west directly to somewhere where my cursor
Somebody's
is,
house.
the trees. Yeah, so if, say you're coming from the south end, as you mentioned, Carolyn, and you walk up to this point, what do? You're almost forced to utilize this person's driveway, cross the street, not at the lawful area, and hook up back onto the other neighbor's driveway to hook back up onto the sidewalk on the other side.
Right.
It's not a safe, definitely not a safe alternative.
No, it's not very. When you're using a walker or wheelchair or something, it's like, oh my gosh, because they make it harder.
And we haven't even discussed winter,
No.
because those driveways are steeper than any of the sidewalks.
Yeah.
That adds a whole nother conundrum.
But that's something to, you always consider when you do these audits. What about when there's ice and snow?
So we can jump up now to page 27. We'll talk about public transit access. We talked about this a little bit when we were over at Maria and Second. I guess general observations. I don't think we ever saw a city bus during our time outside, but I guess more through anecdotal evidence. If you are a user of public transit, do you feel that the bus stops are accommodating for people of all needs, of all abilities? And do you think, maybe to expand on that, do you think getting to those public transit stops are sufficient? Is the adequate infrastructure in place that if you're somebody, say if you're somebody along Union Street, along Meadow Street, and you want to go to the nearest bus stop around the intersection here, do you think that the infrastructure is in place? Do you feel generally safe going from your place of residence, for example, to the bus stop?
Can you point those out? I don't know if we had those pointed out. So starting with Division Street.
Yeah.
Are you on Maria Drive right now? Starting
Yep.
with Division, where
So bus stops would be, you can see the.
are there shelters?
Most of, I don't think there's any of them.
Okay,
There
no
wasn't any
shelters.
shelters.
But,
Yeah, so you got Prentice over by Dozerac, Prentice Street.
okay.
Then we talked about, Lynn talked about this bus stop here.
Oh, that's on
especially-
Second.
Yep,
Okay.
on Second
So
Street.
that's all there is.
Walker, you have a couple along West.
Okay.
You have one along West and one by Georgia, and another one farther towards.
So along
Forest.
Maria, there's only the one about at the intersection of Division and Maria, then one at the intersection of Maria and Prentice, and then one at the intersection of Maria and Second Street.
Correct.
Okay.
I think that they're, at best, traversable, but not convenient.
I'd say it would feel the safest trying to get to the one on Second Street, because that's right next to the intersection that doesn't feel safe. So it's kind of like a double whammy there.
And maybe we could talk a little bit more about this intersection specifically. So you recall Director Badun talking about this intersection and some of the potential improvements, designs that were looked at as part of a potential improvement to this intersection. If it's a four-way stop, controlled intersection, mini roundabout. Are there, if you're a public transit user and say you want to utilize this bus stop by Final Score or this bus stop just south of Maria, is there a certain design of this intersection that you would feel more safe if you're a pedestrian, say, wanting to cross Maria to walk to reach this bus stop? Do you feel more safe if it's, say, a mini roundabout type of design, or a controlled intersection, a four-way stop? Is there a general preference if you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist?
I think the idea is that the transit stop itself is designed, and it just isn't plunked in on the street. Mm-hmm. And that may be that, you bump into it, or it can just be that there's enough visibility everywhere, so you feel safe going to it. And that means that visibility both from seeing traffic and seeing if someone's going to jump out at you.
I guess whatever the best traffic calming measure would be too, because like we said, people speed a lot right there, and seeing cars drive slower would be enough to feel safer.
Okay. Any other comments regarding public transit? If not, we will jump to, we'll touch on Build a Better Block. We could touch a little bit on winter weather since, Mike, you mentioned that earlier. Obviously this was something that was not discussed earlier this afternoon. Today is definitely the complete opposite of winter weather. But anecdotal experience, driving along Maria Drive along Walker Street. What are your thoughts as to current practice? Do you feel that the sidewalks are well maintained, that there's not a issue with sidewalks being left untouched? Do you feel, we've talked about this as a commission in the past, the curb ramps, just through anecdotal knowledge, do you recall there being issues about curb ramps along certain intersections not being cleared? So if you're a walker, if you're somebody in a wheelchair, and wanting to cross an intersection, that it poses a significant hurdle.
All the intersections are a hurdle when there's new snow, because you have the large windrows of snow. I think the big deal is, and I think that the city's been better at it, is when you call in and say, this sidewalk is not shoveled, it's not traversable, they do seem to have been responding to it. I know that every month they send out a bunch of citations, and I think that that's something for us to bring up every single fall and beginning of winter. Yeah. Around Thanksgiving, we should, as a commission, on our soapbox that we have, talk about it. And I think we have to do it every year, because there's a new group every year.
And I believe it was either last year or 2 years ago, we did a trial run where we sent out mailers to basically a designated corridors for properties who have a curb ramp, to basically say, hey, your backstory, we can't force somebody to clear a curb ramp of snow. But the purpose of that letter was to say, hey, we encourage you as a property owner to maintain a clear path along that curb ramp, and here's the benefits, here's the reasons why you should consider clearing that. it's been kind of, through experience through that targeted approach, it was kind of a spotty response. Say there was some properties who you've noticed there were issues in the past who have now, who have since cleared their curb ramps of snow, but there were still other properties who still didn't focus on clearing that curb ramp. So I agree, Mike. Yeah, that's definitely something that, unfortunately, this isn't a one-time deal that if you tell somebody one time, the whole issue is going to be resolved. It's something that's going to require yearly follow-ups to tell.
Well, and there's always new homeowners that do it,
New homeowners
or
Yeah.
renters, or whatever.
or renters. Yeah.
I would hope with it being less, it seems like there's a lot less residential curb ramps, that hopefully that it's clearer than most of the streets that I walk on that aren't, that they would clear the curb ramps, because a lot of people shovel their sidewalks but don't shovel the curb ramps, and if they do, it's not wide enough for a stroller, let alone a wheelchair. So
Yeah, and that's honestly, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because technically per code, it's not worded as such that, say you have a 5-foot wide sidewalk, that the full 5-foot wide sidewalk has to be cleared of snow. So you see sporadically throughout town where you have kind of a shovel width wide of snow that's cleared, and that's it. If you're somebody who's walking through it, cool, that's great. If you're somebody in a wheelchair, odds are it's not wide enough to go through it. So it's
not
a really
wide
good
enough
point.
for a stroller.
Or a stroller. Yeah.
Nope.
What about at bus stops, as far as, because right against the road, there's a big pile of snow all the time from the plows. Is that cleared by a bus company, or does somebody getting on the bus have to go through these? I'm unfamiliar with the bus.
Honestly, that's a very good question. I'm assuming if the city would clear that, it would either, odds are it would be streets. I'd be surprised if transit department, unless Carolyn with Transportation Commission, if you know.
Thomas never even mentioned that.
Yeah.
I've never even heard anything about that.
Okay.
Like at bus stops there, I never heard anything. That would
That's
be
really interesting. Yeah. I'll have to
I
ask
never even
Talon
thought
that.
of it.
Yeah.
I obviously don't use public transit.
Remember who gets sued if someone falls on a sidewalk?
Yeah.
It's not the property owner. It's Scott Badun, the Director of Public Works, by statute. We have an ordinance that says that homeowners are supposed to clear the sidewalk, or the adjacent property owner. But the law says the person who's responsible to make sure they're all doing it is the Director of Public Works.
Okay. This will be the last page of the packet. We'll just do overall summary, I guess, overall observations. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on, just general comments regarding our walk audit earlier today?
I think this walk audit, as opposed to the ones we've had in previous years, really, the big issue was a discontinuous sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I think that the whole group thought that it was really important that we get that done. The one other deal was when we were talking about the mixed-use path at Maria, whether that would obviate the necessity for a bike path on the main roadway. And I think it's important for us to, these mixed-use paths are good and they work, but they do not, they're not a substitute for a regular on-street bike path. Because we have bikers that can maintain 18 to 20 miles an hour with no trouble at all. If you get them on a bike path with pedestrians, that's not a safe deal.
I think what Trevor might have been trying to say is to have a protected bike lane also with the side.
No, he was telling me that it was, I know, he thought that we could have one and not the other, and I said, no, we need both.
But I mean, it would be both, because the way my brain works anyways is that we would have a protected bike lane in lieu of like the sidewalk, since the sidewalk would be also the path. No?
I don't think, I think he thought he'd just have a wide mixed use. He likes them.
The growing use of e-bikes too, and their speed is going to
Yeah.
be something too.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been, e-bikes, e-scooters has been something in the planning profession has been increasing in conversations about how do you regulate it. I mean, in my time in La Crosse and especially Milwaukee, you know, the issue of, you know, you leave your e-scooter, for example, when you're done with it, but they leave it right in the middle of a sidewalk. It takes some time for somebody to pick that back up and clear it from the sidewalk. So, you know, what are ways that communities can better regulate so those instances don't happen
Well,
here?
you're talking about those rental scooters, aren't
Yeah.
you? Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't have those, so.
Not now.
Not
Yeah.
now, but
You're right.
I mean,
There are a lot of e-bikes being used. I see them all the time on my street, like a lot more in the past couple of years. It seems to have doubled. So I would think there would be a lot on Maria just because it'd be a lot easier to get groceries with an e-bike than a regular bike. So I would definitely use one to get groceries if I had one.
Well, it depends, we also have to differentiate. I have an e-bike, it means it's electronic assist. What it allows me to do is bike a lot farther than I could before, so I don't use it for speed. I use it because I can't bike as far as I could when I was a biker. So most people I know do not have an e-bike so they can go really fast. Most of them are middle-aged or older that have
Yes.
them so that they can enjoy biking around the city and putting on 15 miles and not having it be daunting. So
That's definitely what I
there are
noticed.
bikes that are self-propelled, but an actual e-bike is electric assist, and you have to pedal in order to make it even go. You know, it's not, it doesn't have its own, it can't go on its own. So there are different types of bikes that we need to differentiate on. Well, I mean, when it gets to that point, or if it ever does. But
Have any of you seen that unicycle in Park Ridge on going down? Oh, it goes about 35 miles an hour. Guy's on it, and to go faster, he leans forward. It's like someone riding to their death. And they're on the sidewalk.
oof.
there aren't any sidewalks in Park Ridge.
Iverson Park.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's mixed use
Goes right on that
path.
one.
You were right, Jen. It was a mixed use path.
No, I'll have to watch for
That'd be a
that.
little daunting.
It's scary.
Any other last minute comments, just overall observations? Otherwise, appreciate the opportunity again this year to do the walk audit.
Yeah.
And looking forward to it next year. Probably going to be the luck of the draw again. It's going to be a hot sunny day again next year, but just the way it
It's
rolls.
better than cold and snowy.
Ain't that the truth?
Well, I don't know if it's better, but
There being no further business, we stand adjourned.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.